Hi everyone, my name's Nithya, and I'll be joined today by my classmates Kamal and Sammy to go over some of the best practices on how to give a case. Through this video, we will be simulating 3 distinct levels of case giving and offering analysis on some of the strengths and weaknesses in each session. Please do note that this video is only simulating parts of a case, and we will not be going through a case in its entirety. So why is the art of case giving so important? As you all know, cases are the foundation of any consulting interview, and knowing how to give a good case will be critical to the learning process for both parties. By giving a good case, the interviewee will be allowed to tackle problems on their own and really showcase their critical thinking, analytical, and communication abilities. Additionally, giving a good case will allow the interviewer to understand the main drivers behind a case and use that to elevate their own casing performance. The sequence of the video will follow bad, good, and great case giving examples. And as the moderator, I will be jumping in periodically to review the key takeaways from each case.
Hey Kamal, thanks for coming here today. Excited to start with the interview. I want to jump right into it.
All right, let's go.
Let's see what we have here. Our client owns a large hotel chain and is thinking about investing in an add-on for a water park on one of its properties. This has been tested in some places and has a lot of potential benefits. Family-friendly, year-round availability, and potential to bring in new clientele. They've done a lot of work surveying their chain and believe that they have found the right hotel to experiment with a water park add-on. Currently, this hotel has a lot of business travelers, but our client believes it would also be attractive for families. Our client is nervous about the capital required to build the add-on and wants to make sure that they are making the right investment. That's why we've brought you on board. What do you think?
Sounds like a very interesting question. Do you mind if I just do a quick read back to make sure I got all the information?
Sure, go ahead.
Excellent. So our client is a large hotel chain who is considering investing in a water park at one of their hotel locations. And this will be open year round. And they feel like they've identified the right hotel where to make this investment. However, they've called us in to determine whether or not this would be a good investment for them to make.
Sure.
Okay, excellent. So I do have a few clarifying questions. You mentioned that they are concerned about capital. Is there a concern with funding?
Let me check. No.
Okay, excellent. Do we have any sense of whether or not there are any competitors in this in the region where this hotel currently is?
There's no competitors, so we're not that worried about them at the moment.
Okay, great. If you don't mind, I would like to take a moment to structure my thoughts on how I would solve this problem.
Sure.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Thank you. All right. So in solving this problem, there are 3 key areas I would like to take a look at. First, I would like to take a look at the costs, and then I'd like to take a look at the revenues, and finally, I'd like to look at the potential competitive response of any competitors in the area.
Sure.
Do you feel like these 3 areas cover everything we need to take a look at to solve this problem?
I think that's good for now. Where do you want to start?
Okay, great. Do you have any cost information?
Yeah, so I do. The investment's going to cost $6 million.
Okay.
The cost structure there's also variable costs of $40 per night per room.
Excellent.
While we're going down this path, actually, the main thing we're trying to figure out right now is how much the hotel needs to charge per room to recoup these costs.
I see. Okay. So essentially, what they'd be getting in terms of revenue from the hotel.
Exactly.
Excellent. All right.
Now that we've seen what a bad case giving session looks like, I would like to go over some key improvement areas. Firstly, the case giver, Sammy, was not prepared to do this case. When Kamal asked him clarifying questions following the prompt, Sammy could not immediately answer and was searching through his papers. Second, Sammy provided Kamal with all the cost information without waiting for him to get specific on what data he needed and the rationale behind it. Ideally, Sammy would have pushed Kamal to drive the discussion on critical elements of cost structure before providing any data.
Okay, I think I have all the information I need to calculate the new rates. What I'm going to do is divide the investment cost by the number of rooms, multiply that by the occupancy rates, and then multiply that by the number of days in a year. Do we know how big this hotel is?
Sure, the hotel is 400 rooms, okay. And you mentioned occupancy rate too. That's at 50% on average.
Okay, thank you. And can I make the assumption that the hotel will be open for 300 days in a year?
Let's go with 350 actually.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. All right, so dividing the initial investment by the number of rooms, by the occupancy rate, and adding the variable costs per room per night, that comes to $130 as the new rate.
That's actually not right. You forgot the payback period of 3 years for the investment.
I see. So that would mean instead of having a $90 per room per night increment, we would only have a $30, and that would mean that the room rate would then be $70.
That's right. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that means our client will be able to hit their required payback period.
So why don't you go ahead and give me your recommendation then?
Excellent. Do you mind if I take a moment to gather my thoughts
Sure.
and put together a recommendation?
Sure.
Thank you. All right. So I think that our client should go ahead and make this investment by increasing the room rates to only $70, which is fairly low compared to comparable resorts. They should be able to maintain their clientele and pay back this investment within the 3-year time period. Now, I would say one of the risks involved with this investment is our client has never run a water park at a hotel location, and so there would be some operational risks involved with this. And I'd say some of the next steps should be looking at case studies of other hotel chains that have invested in water parks.
Great. Thank you.
Third, the case was driven by Sammy from end to end. He did not allow Kamal to pick a point of view or direction and proceeded to lead him to the payback period calculations without much thought. Finally, Sammy did not push back on any of Kamal's ideas and did not give him a brainstorming opportunity. This was highlighted when Sammy did not ask for a risk analysis and moved straight to the recommendation. The big takeaway from this discussion is that the case giver needs to challenge the caser by pushing back on questions and ideas and allowing the caser to drive the case forward without providing too much information up front. Feel free to pause the video here to read through the slide.
Hi Kamal, thanks for coming in today. I want to jump straight into the case interview portion.
Right,
So
let's do it.
our client owns a large hotel chain and is thinking about investing in an add-on for a water park on one of its properties. This has been tested in some places, has a lot of potential benefits. It's family friendly, year-round availability, and potential to bring in new clientele. They've done a lot of work surveying their chain. They think they found the right hotel to experiment with the water park. Currently, this hotel has a lot of business travelers, but our client believes it would also be attractive for families. They're a little bit nervous about the capital required to build the add-on, and they want to make sure they're making the right investment. So we've brought you on board. What do you think about it?
All right. So, sounds like a really interesting problem. I'm just going to read this back to make sure I have all the information.
Sure.
So, our client is a large hotel chain, and they're currently looking at potentially adding on a water park to one of their hotel locations.
That's right.
This hotel is currently family friendly, so I'm assuming that it caters to families for the most part. They've identified the right location where they'd like to make this investment. However, they are concerned about some of the capital elements to this, and they've brought us in to take a look at future profitability and so forth.
Yeah, everything's right. Just want to clarify that the hotel wants to become more family friendly, but right now the main customer
apologies,
is business travelers.
I missed that. Okay, all right. So they currently cater to business travelers. Got it. Okay, I do have a couple of clarifying questions, just to make sure I have a full picture. So, do we know what the current competitive landscape is at this hotel site?
There's no competitors with a water park,
Okay.
So we don't anticipate any sort of competitive response either.
Okay. And you did mention that they are concerned about capital. Are there any financing issues that we need to be taken into consideration?
We'll get into some of that
Okay.
later in the interview.
All right, great. All right, I think I have enough information to structure my thoughts. Do you mind if I take a moment to put these
Go
down?
ahead, yeah.
All right, thank you. So there are three main areas that I would like to take a look at when solving this problem. The first is the revenues, the other is the costs, and I would still like to take a look at what potential competitive response would be. Do you feel like these three areas cover everything we need to take a look at to solve this problem?
Sure, what do you want to get started with?
I'd like to start with the costs. Do you have any cost information?
What kind of costs do you think there are?
So for an investment like this, there would be fixed costs. There might be variable costs, but I think the fixed cost would be the bulk of what we should be taking into consideration, particularly the investment costs. Do we know what this investment is going to cost?
Yeah, the investment's going to cost $6 million.
All right, thank you. And are there any variable costs that we should be taking into consideration?
Well, what sort of variable costs do you think there are at a hotel?
So one of the big ones would be utilities, so electricity, water, and I would think that if you were to invest in a water park, those two things would be increased significantly. Labor is usually a fixed cost, but depending on what the wage structure is at this hotel, we could have hourly workers, and so that could be rolled into the overall variable costs and spread out over the number of rooms that there are.
Great. So we think there's going to be a variable cost of $40 per room per night.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now that we've seen an example of a good case-giving session, I would like to highlight the areas that went well, as well as some of the areas for improvement. To start, Sammy was well prepared for the case, as demonstrated by his ability to answer the clarifying questions without looking through any of his papers. Additionally, Sammy pushed Kamal to brainstorm case-specific cost drivers before providing any data, allowing him to showcase his thought process.
So I think we've covered all of the costs. I want to actually jump to the revenue side. How much would we need to charge per room to recoup all these costs that we just walked through?
Okay, so this sounds like a payback question. So we have the fixed costs. We know what the variable costs are going to be. So in order to calculate what the payback would be, or what the new room rate should be, I'm going to divide the fixed costs by the number of rooms, multiplied by the occupancy rate, multiplied by the number of days in a year when this hotel is open. So do we know how large this hotel is?
Yeah, the hotel is 400 rooms.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any idea what the occupancy rate is for the hotel?
The occupancy rate is 50% right now.
Nice. And can I make the assumption that the hotel is open for 300 days in a year?
Let's go with 350 for the calculation.
Okay. All right. So based on that, the $6 million investment, the new room rate should be $130, factoring in the variable cost of $40 per room per night.
So I think there's something we're missing here. What do you think about the time element of the investment?
Oh, the payback period, right. Do we know if our client has any payback period targets?
Yeah, they normally want to break even in 3 years.
3 years? Okay, thanks. So factoring that in, it would mean that our incremental cost would no longer be $90 per room per night, but $30. And adding that to the $40 variable cost, the new room rate should be $70 per room per night.
Okay.
Yeah. And this seems relatively low compared to competitors around the country that have hotels and water parks tagged onto them. So I think that there are opportunities to look at higher pricing.
So with regards to pricing, would you want to go with a la carte, so people would pay separately for the water park, or it's all inclusive, everyone pays for it whether they use it or not?
You did mention that this hotel primarily caters to business clients, and I know that with the water park, the clientele makeup may change, but particularly for the business clients whose companies are paying for these anyway, I think they're a little less price sensitive, and so I would make this an all-inclusive charge.
Great. What do you think are some of the other risks of the investment?
Given that the majority of the clients who currently stay at this hotel are business clients, I can imagine a scenario in which they might feel less likely to stay at this hotel if you have families with kids running around.
Right.
So I think there's a potential loss of business but that could be made up with the increased occupancy by families who are coming to the water park.
Sure. What about, what are some other ways of increasing revenue through this water park?
So I've been to a couple of water parks in my lifetime, and I know that they usually have gift shops, restaurants. You have people who come in and forget their swimwear, flip-flops, and so on and so forth. So I think there are revenue opportunities in those areas.
So, it sounds like we have a kind of good idea of the cost and revenues from this investment. I have a meeting with the CEO in a half hour. Could you summarize your recommendation?
Absolutely. Do you mind if I take a moment to gather my thoughts?
Sure, go ahead.
Excellent. So I recommend that our client goes ahead with this investment, even at a fairly low pricing of $70 per room per night. They would be able to meet their payback target of 3 years. Like I mentioned, this is relatively low compared to competitors around the country, and so there are opportunities for them to actualize higher revenue. Now, speaking of revenues, we know that their current clients are business travelers, and so with families coming in, there might be a higher risk of reduced occupancy by these travelers, but there would be increased occupancy from the families, which could offset or even increase that revenue deficit.
Got it. Yeah, I definitely agree, and thanks for coming in.
All right, thank you.
After the room rate calculation, Sammy allowed Kamal to state the so what behind the number and provide rationale for its feasibility. This is a critical next step that the interviewer will look for following any calculations or insights. Finally, the brainstorming opportunity around additional sources of revenue and risks gave Kamal another opportunity to showcase his creativity and business judgment. In terms of areas for improvement, Sammy should have let Kamal drive the case in its entirety. Additionally, he should have pushed back more on Kamal's insights and asked for further brainstorming. This level of casing is sufficient for beginning IPT students. However, we would like to see an evolution to great case giving as showcased by the next example.
Hey Kamal, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you.
I want to jump right into the case interview portion.
Let's do it.
So our client owns a large hotel firm, and they're thinking about investing in an add-on for a water park on one of their properties. This has been tested in some places and has a lot of potential benefits. Family friendly, year-round availability, potential to bring in new clientele. They've done a lot of work surveying their chain, and they believe they found the right hotel to experiment with for a water park add-on. Currently, this hotel has a lot of business travelers, but our client believes that with the water park, it could also be attractive to families. They're a bit nervous about the capital required to build the add-on, and they want to make sure they're making a good investment, which is why they've brought us in. What do you think?
I think that's a really interesting problem. I'm just going to recap everything that you said to make sure I have a full picture. So our client is a large hotel chain, and they're looking at investing in a water park as an add-on to one of their existing hotels. This hotel is family friendly, so I'm assuming that majority of their clients are families, some of which come with their kids. They've identified a particular site where they want to install this water park, but they are concerned about some of the capital requirements, and they've brought us in to figure out, what those would be, run profitability analyses and so forth. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that right now they actually cater mostly to business professionals. They want to become more family friendly with the water park, but the current clientele is mostly business professionals at the moment.
Got it. Thanks for that clarification. I do have a couple of clarifying questions to get a better picture of what we're looking at here. Do we know what the competitive landscape is at this proposed site?
Well, why do you think the competitive landscape might affect the decision to invest or not?
Well, I think if there is a large degree of competition at this site, then it could make this investment less profitable.
Yeah, right now they picked this location partially because there are no competitors with a water park in the area.
Okay, thanks for that. My second question is, do we have any sense of how this project's going to be financed? You mentioned they have some capital concerns.
why might that affect whether this is a good investment or not? What should they be concerned about?
Well, depending on how they plan to finance this, say getting a loan from the bank or using cash in hand, they might need to take into consideration the cost of capital or the opportunity costs.
Sure. They're actually going to be able to use cash on hand for this investment.
Okay, all right, thank you. Right. I think I have all the information I need to structure my thoughts on how I would solve this problem. Do you mind if I take a couple of moments just to put my thoughts down?
Go right ahead.
All right, thank you.
Now that we've started the great case giving session, I would like to highlight some of the key areas that went well. To start, Sammy pushes back on Kamal's clarifying questions by making him state why they are relevant. This is a technique that interviewers will use to test critical thinking and communication abilities.
So the three main areas I'd like to take a look at as far as this problem is concerned are revenues, costs, and I know you mentioned that there are currently no competitors in this area, but I would like to take a look at what potential competitive response would be. Do you think these three buckets cover everything we should be taking a look at?
I think that's a good start. Where would you like to begin?
I'd like to start with the costs. Do we have any cost information?
Well, what do you think is a typical cost structure for a business like this?
So when thinking about a hotel, I would think that it's highly capital intensive. So you'd have a large portion of your costs being fixed costs. The incremental costs of having an extra occupant would be comparatively low. So I think that fixed cost would be a large portion.
What is the fixed cost in this case?
It would be the cost of the investment as far as constructing the water park and opening and running is concerned.
Okay, so that's going to be $6 million a year.
Okay.
We've determined to actually build the water park.
Okay, $6 million. Thanks for that.
And then I know you just mentioned the marginal cost of having an additional occupant. What do you think are some of those costs?
So if you think about a hotel, I guess depending on whether or not a room is occupied, you might think about extra supplies, cleaning costs, maintenance costs, and any potential extra staff associated with extra cleaning or maintenance.
Okay, so we have done a study of that, and we've determined that the additional cost is about $40 per room per night.
Okay, thanks for that. Great. All right.
I think you've covered the costs. What else would you like to take a look at?
Now that we have all the cost information, I would like to look at some of the expected revenues.
So, how do you think we might drive revenues out of this investment?
Well, I think there are several ways in which we could drive revenues. One of the ways could be opening up merchandising stores. So I've been to water parks, and I know they're usually like little gift shops where you can buy T-shirts, flip-flops, or swimwear if you forget them. You could also have little restaurants or outlets, etc. And one of the other ways could be to transfer the costs to occupants of the hotel, so by increasing the rates.
Sure. So our client is considering that, and they've actually come to us. They want to know specifically how much we need to charge our hotel customers to cover the cost of this investment.
I see. Okay, so they're looking at increasing the hotel rates. Got it.
Yeah.
So I think I have most of the information that I need to calculate this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the fixed cost, which is the cost of the investment, by the number of rooms, multiply that by the occupancy rate, and then multiply that by the number of days in a year that the hotel is open. So do we have any sense for how large this hotel is?
Yeah, it's 400 rooms.
It's 400 rooms, thanks. Do we know what the occupancy rates are?
What do you think a healthy occupancy rate is for a hotel like this?
Just based on my knowledge of the industry, occupancy rates for hotels are generally in the 70 to 80% range.
That's right. This one's a little bit lower. It's actually only about 50%.
Interesting. Okay, all right, 50%. And for the purposes of this calculation, is it okay if I just assume that the hotel is open for 300 days in a year?
Well, let's go 350 actually.
Okay. Great. All right. So I have all the information I need to calculate this and divide the 6 million, number of rooms, and then factoring in the $40 per room per night variable cost. That comes to $130 per room per night.
So I think you're on the right path. There's something we're missing. What are some of the criteria people normally base a investment on?
So when making an investment, you typically would want to think about the cost of capital. You mentioned that the hotel is planning to use their cash on hand, so opportunity costs. You might also want to think about a payback period, a return on investment, etc.
Yeah, you mentioned payback period. This chain really focuses on having a 3-year break-even payback period.
I see.
Here, Sammy provides a stretch opportunity by asking Kamal to discuss the typical cost structure of the industry. He then allows for more brainstorming by asking about new revenue streams that could stem from the project. Finally, Sammy goes beyond the structure of the prompt by testing Kamal's knowledge of investment criteria.
Right, the 3-year payback period. So if I take that into consideration, that would mean that the incremental cost is not $90 but $30, and adding that to the $40 per room per night variable cost would mean that our client would need to charge $70 per room per night to pay back within the 3-year period.
Yeah, 70 is right.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a relatively low number, just comparing other hotels around the country that also have water parks. So, as part of my recommendation, there is an opportunity to increase that rate and capture more revenue from customers.
So that $70 that we've been mentioning, that's actually if we decide to go with this all-inclusive model where everyone in the hotel pays $70. They're actually also exploring an a la carte option where people would only pay for the water park if they choose to use it during their stay, or alternately on its own. What do you think is the right model between those two?
I would go with the all-inclusive option. You did mention earlier that the majority of the current clients are business clients. I'm assuming that their companies are paying for their hotel stays, and those companies are a lot less price sensitive than individual customers, and so yeah, I don't think there would be too much of a drop off.
I'm a little bit worried because professional travel industry, they've gotten really sophisticated and they're negotiating tighter and tighter deals, and I'm a little bit worried that there's going to be some pushback, especially when business travelers might not are probably not going to use the water park. How would you deal with some of that risk?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is some risk of potential drop off in occupancy by business travelers. But with the expected increase in occupancy by families who are visiting the water park and staying at the hotel, there should be sufficient revenue to offset the reduction in revenue from the business segment.
And what do you think are some of the other risks besides that pricing one that we just mentioned?
There are definitely other risks. This is the first time that our client is doing this, so operationally they have no experience in this area. There could also be risks to the branding of the hotel. If the majority of clientele are business clients, then if they start to offer these other amenities like the water park, then their overall brand image could change, and that could affect revenues in other locations around the country.
Definitely. Any other risks?
Absolutely. So by bringing in a water park, I would imagine that there would also be increased liability risks. So that's something they would need to take a look at from a legal standpoint as well.
Definitely. I've got a meeting with the CEO in 30 minutes. I need to deliver a recommendation. What do you think I should tell him?
Do you mind if I take a moment just to gather my thoughts and give you the final recommendation?
Sure, go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. So my recommendation to the client would be to go ahead and invest in this hotel. Even at a fairly conservative $70 per room per night rate and a 50% occupancy rate, they would be able to hit their payback period target of 3 years. Now, having said this, there are some potential risks that need to be taken into consideration. Like I mentioned earlier, the operational risks, since they've never done this before, some of the potential increases in liability, as well as the possible loss of revenue from the business clients. I would say some of the next steps would be to carry out a customer analysis to see what that delta in revenue would be, and also carry out further case studies on other hotel chains that have done this in the past.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
In the last section of this video, Sammy makes Kamal take a stance on the all-inclusive versus a la carte option and forces him to defend his position, which simulates the pressure of a real case interview. Finally, he pushes Kamal for more brainstorming on risks to test his poise and creativity. The key takeaway from this session is that the case giver is challenging the caser throughout by pushing back on ideas, prompting brainstorming, and asking the caser to defend their ideas and conclusions.